electric bill. So I think it's a bigger picture that we need to look at. It's not just a matter of the interest, but it's also in terms of what is necessity. I think one of the things that I am concerned about in terms of music, I'm very much into neo-soul, and neo-soul is a music that reminds me of some of the 60s and really in a different format. And so when we think of, and I'm not putting down rap, so no one throw anything, there are some good rap artists out there. But we have to think in terms of who's making the money. You know, rap is still doing very well, and there's some excellent rap artists that are out there. But there's this neo-soul group, Jill Scott and a lot more that I can name. They are still doing well, but they are also seeing that the public is still not interested in this particular music. It's not sort of selling. So we have to think about this in terms of a level, not just economic, but what about interest? When you go to buy a CD, what are you going to buy? Or what movie are you looking at? Are you looking at more dramatic movies, mysteries, or musicals, or something that has that very interesting point of view for you to look at? So I think in general, and especially the generation that we're speaking to right now, when you sit here and think, what is it that you like about the arts, this music? What is it that makes you interested in wanting to do this in the future so that we don't continue to have this economic crisis? And particularly your point right here at Prince George's Community College, how can we support the efforts of our own plays and musicals right here? I think there are a lot of things that we can do despite this economic crisis.
Thank you, Dawn. Barbara, do you have this a little bit elaboration on creativity and economic crisis? That is probably more general on creativity, whether economic crisis may have a really impact. We have some examples.
You know, I'm not really sure about the creativity aspect of that and the impact of economics. And the only reason I say that, I want to talk about a little bit what Gary said and Dawn and Tammy in terms of where is the public going to spend their money? Is it going to be on edgy things that are chancy? Well, when times are bad, people want to feel good. Mm-hmm. They don't want to have something that's going to wrench their insides. That's not what they want. Mm-hmm. They got enough of that just dealing day to day to day with the worries of how to make everything work in their ordinary daily lives. So when they're going to spend money or go out to some kind of entertainment, they want to feel good. And we saw that during the Depression of the late 20s and 30s, when a lot of movies were made that were feel-good kind of movies. And people would see them because they needed to be uplifted. They did not need to go down more. Doesn't mean there weren't things made that kind of was soul-searching, but there was an awful lot of just musicals and so forth that made people feel good, and they would support that.
During World War II as well, and September 11th,
right.
the same idea.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
But when we talk about creativity, I think those artists that are going to create on the edge are still going to do it. In the visual arts, I'm not sure how much money has ever been there for the artist that is truly working outside of his time, who's working on the edge, the peripheral. That artist is still going to produce. I don't think they're going to sell, but they are going to produce because so many, and again, I have to just talk about the visual arts because that's my field, but so many artists do not sell. It is only a handful of artists that can actually make their living, a tiny, tiny portion that can make their living for all the artists that are out there producing work. So we're driven by a different energy. And it isn't going to stop creative people from creating, and it isn't going to stop creative people from creating work that is edgy. And when I say edgy, I mean work that isn't necessarily acceptable to the population in general.
Thank you, Barbara. And I would have one additional example related to creativity during the very bad times, not only the times of economic crisis, but of wars. During the World War I, we know that one of the most, I would say, creative movement appeared as a protest to the World War I, and that is the movement of Dadas.
Yeah.
They have made this so important movement, which really changed the art of the second half of the 20th century so profoundly, without nothing. They didn't have money, but they have idea, and they have their very strength and creativity, which really produced a totally new approach towards the art in the second half of the 20th century when the war was over. So I think that, of course, that artists have been offended by the crisis. Someone is selling, someone is unable to sell, but this creativity is something beyond, I would say, cataclysmic situations, including economic.
That's an excellent point, I think, in terms of thinking about slavery. In terms of slaves being African-American slaves, in terms of surviving such a very difficult time, the music, it was singing while they were toiling. It was the words that they had for each other in terms of getting through that. We know, of course, even in terms of the passage, in terms of people needing to get to certain areas, there was a time where people talked through songs. So there were a lot of certain things, like Harriet Tubman would have a song that would help slaves and free them in terms of that, but that was something that they did to survive. So I think it's an excellent point that you're saying. We have an economic crisis, but looking at former examples, how can we still do that today? The blues. The blues was literally for people when they were feeling very down. They would talk about these songs, write them down, but then express them in their music. So a lot of African Americans and European Americans listened to this music to help them feel good. And I think that's the point that you were making. And then finally, I think right now, the African American church, gospel music, is helping a lot of people feel better about themselves. And I think what you said in terms of energy makes a big difference. What can we do, even in an economic crisis on a psychological level, to feel good so that we're not always feeling stressed? And just think about what you do for music and arts. It's something that you want to do to feel better about yourself.
Well, I think what it all comes down to is that all of these art forms are really a form of expression. Simply letting your emotions out and maybe not doing them with the use of language, but maybe through something visual or music or acting it out or having a dance. All these things are a form of expression.
I want to say there's another aspect to that too, and I think we're seeing that in this recession that we're in. When times are good, I'm not sure we just don't sail along, you know? We sail along. But when times are bad, we begin to think a bit more about what we're doing, and how we're going to do it. It's a shift, it's a psychological shift for us, wouldn't you say? And when you have that, it also gives you, when you're psychologically shifted, it gives you a new window to see through. You're seeing a different way. And I think this comes out in the arts, this new vision that we are forced. If we weren't forced to, we might never do it. I mean, sitting on Easy Street is nice, isn't it? But when all of a sudden you can't do that, you have to rethink. And in doing that, you open your mind to new possibilities that you might have just ignored in another
I'm
time.
glad you brought that up, because when I was talking to my friend in the film industry, she's in LA right now, and the big buzz there now is Oliver Stone. We're all familiar with Oliver Stone, great director. He and Michael Douglas and Charlie Sheen did Wall Street in the 80s, where it talked about greed is good and how, you know, everyone should have more money and give more money. And the buzz out there right now is that Oliver Stone and Michael Douglas just signed on to do Wall Street 2, where they're going to look at the economic crisis now and the fact that maybe greed is not so good. And how are they going to pull that off, you know, 20 years later? And is Charlie Sheen going to sign on? That's the next big question. But even in the movie industry, you're not seeing the big blockbusters coming out. May is